Vox and the other Una's soldiers laughed and joked as they blasted human-shaped targets with plasma rifles, mocking the new human soldier Kyle Henderson, set to join their unit. Kyle, a 28-year-old mercenary and veteran, ignored their jeers as he arrived on Zephyrus 6 to represent humanity in a diplomatic exchange with the reptilian Unas species. "This puny human is going to fight alongside us? He wouldn't last 2 seconds against Kalukamsku plasma fire," Vox chuckled, towering over Kyle at 7 feet tall. "No offense, little man, but you're outmatched here." Kyle smirked. He'd heard it all before. "We'll see about that, big guy. Don't underestimate us humans." Major Kaz, the battle-scarred leader of the elite Crimson Claws unit Kyle was assigned to, looked the human up and down skeptically. "Henderson, right? I've read your file. KK-257, serious campaign, not bad. But this ain't no cakewalk. We're the tip of the spear against the Kalukamsku. You're the first human to fight on Mazu 4. Those bug bastards will eat you alive if you can't keep up." As an ominous briefing on their dangerous mission to destroy a key enemy base began, Kyle steeled himself, knowing he carried the weight of proving humanity's worth as soldiers and allies on his shoulders. The Unas-Kalukamsku war had killed millions. If this human couldn't earn the respect of his new unit and survive the brutal battle to come, the fragile UTC-Unas alliance could shatter, and Earth would stand alone against the hostile galaxies. Failure was not an option. Kyle would show these aliens what humans were made of, or die trying. The Crimson Claw's vital mission launched at dawn, thrusting Kyle into the blood and fire of an interstellar war like no human had ever seen. As the dropship roared through the void, Kyle stole a glance at the others. Una's soldiers sat strapped to their crash seats, checking weapons and armor. Kyle cleared his throat, drawing a few suspicious glares. "So any of you fought the Kalukamsku before?" Kyle asked. Zach, a young Unas with bright green scales, piped up. "Not yet, but I've heard stories. They say their plasma burns hotter than a supernova." "Plasma's nasty, but I've seen worse," Kyle said, patting his rifle. "Kinetic rounds, now that's the way to go. More punch, less flash." Some of the Unas chuckled. Kaz just scoffed. Kyle unsheathed his knife, the monomolecular blade glinting. "And when things get up close and personal, this baby's saved my hide more times than I can count." Zach leaned forward, eyes wide. "Whoa, is that a—" Suddenly the ship lurched. Alarms blared. "Incoming fighters!" the pilot roared. Kyle lunged for the gun controls. Peering through the targeting scope, he spied 3 Kalukamsku attack craft, insectoid ships bristling with plasma cannons. Laser blasts hammered the dropship's hull. Kyle gritted his teeth, lined up a shot. The crosshairs settled on a fighter's engine. He squeezed the trigger. The fighter exploded in a shower of shrapnel. Kyle swiveled, already tracking the next bogey. Another squeeze, another fireball. The dropship shuddered, trailing smoke. "We're hit! Brace for impact!" the pilot yelled. The craft plummeted, slamming into the planet's surface. Metal shrieked, glass shattered, then silence. Kyle shook his head, ears ringing. Smoke stung his eyes. He saw Zach pinned under a twisted beam. Kaz lay unmoving, blood pooling beneath his crumpled form. Of the pilot there was no sign. Ignoring the pain in his ribs, Kyle heaved the beam off Zach. "You okay, kid?" Zach nodded shakily. Together they limped to Kaz. Kyle checked for a pulse, found it weak but steady. He ripped open a medkit, started dressing the worst wounds. Laser blasts sizzled overhead. The bugs had found them. "Help me get Kaz into cover," Kyle barked. "Set up a perimeter just like in training." The Unas scrambled to obey. Kyle propped Kaz against the dropship's hull, jabbed him with a stimulant. Kaz's eyes fluttered open. "Henderson?" "We'll talk later," Kyle said. "Right now we've got company." Insectoid shapes scuttled through the underbrush, plasma rifles chittering. Kyle motioned to the others, mouthing silent commands. They fanned out, taking positions behind boulders and fallen logs. As the first bug crested the ridge, Kyle opened fire. The creature's carapace cracked, ichor spraying. More followed, screeching battle cries. Kyle rolled, came up firing. 2 bugs dropped, perforated. He heard Zack yelp, saw the kid go down under a barrage of plasma. "Zack!" Kyle charged, tackling Zack as a plasma bolt sizzled overhead. It struck Kyle square in the chest. He felt a searing heat, then nothing. Zack stared, mouth agape. Kyle's armor smoked but held. "Nanoweave," Kyle grinned. "Never leave home without it." Emboldened, the Unas surged forward. Plasma met kinetic fire, chitin cracked and split. One by one the bugs fell, until only smoke and silence remained. Kyle hauled Zack to his feet. "Still think humans are outmatched?" Zack shook his head, eyes shining with newfound respect. Even Kaz looked grudgingly impressed. But there was no time to celebrate. In the distance, more Kalukamsku warriors mustered. This battle was far from over. Smoke still hung heavy in the air as Kyle gathered the surviving members of the Crimson Claws around the wreckage of their dropship. Kaz, his wounds hastily dressed, leaned heavily against the twisted metal, his eyes hard as he met Kyle's gaze. "All right, Henderson," Kaz growled, his voice strained with pain and grudging respect. "You got us this far. What's our next move?" Kyle crouched, using a stick to sketch a rough map in the dirt. "We're deep in Kalukamsku territory, cut off from support. Our best bet is to complete the mission solo." He tapped a spot on his impromptu map. "Intel suggests their main weapons facility is here, about 20 clicks northeast." Rix, a burly Unas with a scar across his snout, snorted. "And how do you propose we get there? Walk up and knock on the front door?" Kyle grinned, a glint in his eye. "Not quite. We'll use their own ships against them." He pointed to the downed Kalukamsku fighters. "A few of us will take those birds up, make some noise, draw their attention. While they're busy chasing ghosts, a strike team slips in the back way." Zack leaned forward, eager. "What back way?" "These tunnels," Kyle said, tracing a line on the map. "Swipe the schematics off a bug scout a while back. They'll take us right into the heart of the facility." Kaz frowned, considering. "It's risky, we'd be splitting our forces." "It's our best shot," Kyle insisted. "I'll lead the strike team. Zack, Rix, Tor, you're with me. The rest of you give 'em hell topside." Kaz held Kyle's gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, Henderson. We'll do it your way, but if this goes sideways—" "It won't," Kyle promised. He clasped Kaz's arm, Unas style. "We've got this." As the diversion team prepped the fighters, Kyle led his strike force to the tunnel entrance, a narrow fissure hidden beneath a rocky overhang. They checked their weapons and gear, then plunged into the darkness, the beams of their helmet lamps cutting through the gloom. The tunnels were tight, claustrophobic, the walls slick with moisture. They moved quickly, silently, Kyle on point, his rifle at the ready. Zack, just behind him, whispered, "How much further?" "Half a click," Kyle murmured back. "Stay sharp." Suddenly, a flicker of movement ahead. Kyle froze, fist raised. The others halted, tense. Shadows resolved into shapes, Kalukamsku workers, armed with plasma drills and fusion cutters. Kyle motioned, and the team fanned out, taking cover behind outcroppings and stalagmites. As the workers drew near, Kyle held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. They burst from cover, weapons blazing. The workers, caught off guard, scrambled for cover, but Kyle was already among them, his monomolecular blade flashing. He moved like a whirlwind, parrying a plasma drill, then driving his knife up under a worker's chitin plate. The bug dropped, ichor spurting. Rix and Tor laid down suppressing fire, plasma bolts sizzling over Kyle's head as he grappled with another worker, using its body as a shield. Zack, meanwhile, had closed with a hulking overseer, dodging its swinging fusion cutter. He ducked inside its guard, jammed his rifle barrel under its mandibles and pulled the trigger. The overseer's head exploded in a shower of exoskeleton and slime. In seconds it was over. Kyle wiped his blade clean on a worker's carapace, then motioned the team forward. They pushed deeper into the tunnels, the sounds of distant explosions and plasma fire echoing through the rock. Finally they emerged into a vast cavern, the heart of the weapons facility. Towering machines churned and clanked, assembly lines stretching into the distance, and there, on a raised platform, sat row after row of sleek, deadly plasma cannons, ready for shipment to the front lines. Kyle pulled a satchel of DT packs from his belt. "Zach, Rix, Tor, cover me. We'll plant charges here, here, and here," he said, indicating support columns and power junctions. "Set the timers for 5 minutes. That should give us just enough time to exfil before this whole place goes up." The team split up, hurrying to their assigned targets. Kyle sprinted down the main assembly line, ducking and weaving between machinery as he slapped det packs onto vital components. He was just arming the last charge when a plasma bolt sizzled past his ear, close enough to singe his hair. Kyle spun, rifle snapping up. There, striding towards him, was a massive Kalukamsku warrior, a glowing plasma cannon clutched in its claws. It was an elite guard, easily 8 feet tall, its carapace thick with scars and battle trophies. The warrior raised its cannon, energy cells pulsing as it prepared to fire. Kyle threw himself sideways, the plasma bolt scorching the air where he'd been standing a heartbeat before. He rolled to his feet, rifle barking, but the rounds pinged off the warrior's armored hide. Kyle circled, looking for an opening. The warrior tracked him, cannon humming with barely restrained power. It fired again, a sustained beam that swept across the assembly line, leaving molten metal in its wake. Kyle leapt, grabbing onto an overhead gantry. He swung himself up and over, dropping down behind the warrior. It spun, surprisingly agile for its size, but Kyle was already inside its reach, his blade slashing at the joints in its armor. The warrior roared, a deafening sound that shook the cavern. It swung its cannon like a club, trying to crush Kyle beneath its bulk. Kyle ducked and dodged, always one step ahead, his blade darting in again and again, seeking weak points. The warrior was slowing now, a greenish ichor leaking from a dozen wounds. Kyle pressed his advantage, feinting left, then lunging right. His blade sank deep into the warrior's neck, severing vital arteries. The warrior staggered, its cannon falling from suddenly nerveless claws. Kyle snatched up the fallen weapon, feeling its weight and heft. He turned, the cannon whining as it charged, and fired point-blank into the warrior's face. The plasma bolt blasted through chitin and bone, leaving a smoking ruin where the warrior's head had been. "Kyle!" Zach's shout echoed across the cavern. "Charge is set, we gotta move!" Kyle sprinted for the exit. The plasma cannon clutched tight. He saw Zach and the others waiting by the tunnel mouth, waving him on. Behind him, the first det packs began to explode, setting off chain reactions throughout the facility. Gouts of flame and showers of sparks erupted from ruptured machinery, the whole cavern shaking itself apart. Kyle put on a final burst of speed, diving through the tunnel entrance just as a massive explosion blossomed behind him. The shockwave slammed him forward, ears ringing, but he kept his feet. Zach grabbed his arm, hauling him upright, and together the strike team raced back through the tunnels, the sounds of destruction and mayhem echoing in their wake. They burst out into the open air, blinking in the sudden sunlight. In the distance, a column of smoke and fire rose from the shattered remains of the weapons facility, the Crimson Claw's stolen fighters streaking away into the sky. As the smoke from the destroyed weapons facility billowed into the alien sky, Kyle and his strike team emerged from the tunnels to a hero's welcome. The rest of the Crimson Claws, their armor scorched and battered, cheered as Kyle and the others approached, clapping them on the back and shouting their names. Kaz, his wounds now properly dressed, limped forward and clasped Kyle's hand. "Damn fine work, Henderson. Didn't think you had it in you." Kyle grinned, adrenaline still pumping through his veins. "Told you not to underestimate us humans." The destruction of the facility marked a turning point in the war. With their main source of advanced weaponry crippled, the Kalukamsku's offensive faltered. Under Kyle's leadership, the Crimson Claws launched a series of daring raids, striking at the heart of the enemy's operations. On a remote moonbase, Kyle and his team infiltrated a key communications hub, severing the Kalukamsku's command and control network. In the frozen wastes of a methane giant, they sabotaged a vital refueling station, stranding dozens of enemy warships. And in the scorching deserts of a binary star system, They ambushed a column of troop transports, decimating the Kalu-Kamsku's ground forces. Kyle's unorthodox tactics, honed in the crucible of human warfare, proved devastatingly effective. He taught the Unas to fight dirty, to use their environment, to strike hard and fade away. The Crimson Claws became the most feared unit in the UDF, their name whispered with awe by allies and enemies alike. But their victories came at a heavy price. In a brutal battle for control of the Zephyrus spaceport, a strategic choke point, the Kalu-Kamsku threw everything they had at the Crimson Claws. Kyle and his team fought like demons, plasma and kinetic rounds filling the air, but they were badly outnumbered. Zack, fighting at Kyle's side, saw the glint of a sniper's scope a heartbeat before the shot. He didn't hesitate. He threw himself in front of Kyle, taking the high-powered plasma round meant for his friend. The blast burned a hole clean through his chest, dropping him to the blood-slicked floor. Kyle caught him, cradling his head. "Zack, why—" Zack coughed, green blood flecking his lips. "Because you would have done the same and for me." His eyes dulled, his final breath rattling in his throat. Kyle howled, a sound of pure anguish, and charged the sniper's nest, heedless of the shots sparking off his armor. He killed the sniper with his bare hands, snapping its neck like a twig. From that moment, Kyle was a man possessed. He drove the Crimson Claws harder than ever, pushing them to the brink of exhaustion and beyond. Zack's death had lit a fire in him, a burning need to end this war, to make the Kalu-Kamsku pay for every life they had taken. As the conflict reached its fever pitch, UDF Command presented Kyle and his team with one final mission, a desperate gambit to cut the head off the snake. Intelligence had located the Kalu-Kamsku Queen, the mastermind behind the invasion, aboard a massive hive ship deep in enemy territory. If they could kill the Queen, UDF reasoned, the Kalu-Kamsku would collapse into disarray. It was a suicide mission. The hive ship was the most heavily defended target in the galaxy, guarded by legions of the Kalu-Kamsku's most elite warriors. But Kyle and the Crimson Claws had faced impossible odds before and come out on top. They were the only ones who could pull it off. They infiltrated the hive under cover of a diversionary attack, slipping aboard the living ship through a waste disposal chute. Inside, they found themselves in a nightmarish labyrinth of pulsing organic corridors and chittering insectoid horrors. They fought for every inch, leaving a trail of shattered carapaces and ichor in their wake. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of blood and terror, they reached the Queen's chamber at the heart of the hive. She was a towering monstrosity, her bulbous, pulsating form bristling with razor-sharp claws and dripping mandibles. Her compound eyes gleamed with malevolent intelligence as she regarded the intruders. "Foolish mammals," she hissed, her voice a grating buzz. "You think you can stop the swarm? We are infinite. We are unstoppable. Even if you kill me, another will rise to take my place. We will not rest until the galaxy is ours." Kyle stepped forward, his rifle leveled at the Queen's head. "Maybe so," he growled, "but you won't be around to see it." The Queen laughed, a sound like 1,000 nails on a chalkboard. "You have spirit, human. I will enjoy breaking you." Her eyes flashed, and Kyle felt a searing pain lance through his skull. The Queen was a powerful psychic, he realized, able to project agony and despair directly into her enemies' minds. He gritted his teeth, fighting against the psychic assault, and pulled the trigger. The plasma bolt struck the Queen in the center of her head, burning through her exoskeleton. But she didn't fall. With a roar of fury, she lashed out with a massive claw faster than Kyle's eyes could follow. He tried to dodge, but he was a split second too slow. The claw caught him across the chest, its razor edge slicing through his armor like tissue paper. He felt a white-hot agony blossom in his back as his spine shattered under the impact. His legs went numb, and he collapsed, his rifle clattering from his nerveless fingers. Through a haze of pain, he saw Kaz and the others pouring fire into the Queen, their shots tearing great chunks from her hide. She thrashed and screeched, ichor spraying from a dozen wounds, but still she fought on, lashing out with her claws and her mind in equal measure. Kyle tried to rise, tried to join the fight, but his legs wouldn't respond. He could only watch helplessly as his friends fought and died, the Queen's psychic attacks driving them to their knees one by one. In the end, it was Rix who dealt the killing blow. Half his face had been torn away, his right eye a ruined mess, but still he charged, a primed plasma grenade clutched in his fist. He leapt at the Queen, ignoring the claw that punched through his chest, and shoved the grenade down her throat. The explosion ripped the Queen apart from the inside out, showering the chamber in flaming ichor. Rix, his life's blood pouring from his wound, collapsed atop the twitching remains, a final, defiant snarl etched on his ruined face. It was over. The Queen was dead, the hive ship already beginning to self-destruct without her psychic control. The remaining Crimson Claws, battered and bloody, dragged Kyle from the chamber, fighting their way back to their waiting ship as the hive disintegrated around them. They barely made it out before the hive ship exploded, a miniature sun blooming in the void as it plunged into the Kalukamsku home system's star. With the Queen's death, the swarm fell into disarray, the remaining warriors reverting to base instincts. The UDF mopped them up with brutal efficiency, bringing the war to a decisive end. Kyle, paralyzed from the chest down, could only watch from his hover chair as the victory celebrations erupted across UNA's and UDF space. He was hailed as a hero, the savior of the UNA's, the champion of humanity. But he felt hollow, empty. The cost had been too high. At the memorial service for the fallen Crimson Claws, Kyle sat in silence, his eyes fixed on the holographic displays showing the faces of his lost comrades. Zack, Rix, Tor, so many others. They had given their lives for this victory, and what had it brought them? What had it brought him? As the service ended and the mourners began to disperse, Kyle remained staring up at the stars through the viewport. The galaxy was at peace now, but for how long? There would always be another war, another enemy, and he would no longer be able to fight. His mind drifted back to Earth, to the rolling hills and green forests of his childhood. It seemed like a lifetime ago, a distant dream. He wondered if he would ever see his homeworld again, or if he was destined to spend the rest of his days here, among the stars and the ghosts of the fallen. A hand on his shoulder startled him from his reverie. It was Kaz, his face lined with grief and weariness. "You did well, Kyle," the old warrior said softly. "They would be proud of you." Kyle nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He knew Kaz was right, but it was a cold comfort. He had given everything to this war, to these people, and now he had nothing left to give. As Kaz walked away, Kyle turned his chair back to the viewport, his eyes tracing the constellations of alien stars. Somewhere out there, he knew, new threats were stirring, new dangers waiting to be faced. And he would face them, in whatever way he could. For his fallen friends, for the UNA's, for humanity, he would find a way to keep fighting. No matter the cost. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months, and still Kyle remained a prisoner of his own body, trapped in the hover chair that had become his constant companion. He watched as the UNA's and the UTC rebuilt, their cities rising from the ashes of war, their people learning to live and work together in a fragile peace. But for Kyle, there was no peace, no purpose, only the gnawing emptiness that had hollowed him out from the inside. He took to drinking, seeking solace in the numbing embrace of alcohol. It dulled the pain, the memories, the faces of the fallen that haunted his dreams. He drifted through the days in a haze, a ghost of the man he had once been. It was at a memorial service for the Crimson Claws that the message found him. He sat in the back, his hover chair humming softly as the names of the dead were read out, each one a knife to his heart. Zack, Rix, Tor, so many others, their lives snuffed out in the crucible of war. As the service ended and the mourners began to disperse, Kyle felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned, expecting to see Kaz or one of the other survivors, but instead found himself face to face with a stranger, a hooded figure with a scarred face. "Kyle Henderson," the stranger said, his voice a rasping whisper, "I have information that you need to hear." Kyle frowned, his hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that was no longer there. "Who are you?" "A friend," the stranger said, "or at least someone who wants to help you." He leaned in close, his breath hot on Kyle's ear. "There is a new threat to the galaxy, one that only you can stop." Kyle felt a flicker of something, a spark of the old fire that had once burned within him. "What kind of threat?" "A hidden Kalukamsku splinter faction, one that has been secretly amassing weapons and resources for a renewed attack on Una's space," the stranger said. "They call themselves the Scourge, and they are led by a warrior named Zix, a former spy who has defected to their side." Kyle's mind raced, the pieces falling into place. He had heard whispers of the Scourge before, rumors of a rogue faction that had refused to accept the peace treaty between the Unas and the Kalukamsku, but he had dismissed them as just that, rumors, the paranoid ramblings of a galaxy still reeling from the horrors of war. But now, with this stranger's words ringing in his ears, he knew that he had been wrong. The Scourge was real, and they were planning something big, something that could shatter the fragile peace and plunge the galaxy back into the abyss. He looked up at the stranger, his eyes hard. "What do you need me to do?" The stranger smiled, a thin, cruel thing. "I need you to stop them, Kyle Henderson. I need you to do what you do best, what you were born to do." Kyle nodded, his mind already racing ahead, planning, scheming, plotting. He knew that he would need help, allies that he could trust, people who could fight alongside him once more. He thought of Kaz, his old squadmate, the one who had been with him through the worst of the war. He had been distant since the end of the fighting, withdrawing into himself, but Kyle knew that he could count on him, that he would answer the call when it came. And then there was Zix, the former Kalukamsku spy who had defected to the Una's side. He was a wild card, a dangerous one, but Kyle knew that he had valuable intel on the Scourge, that he could be the key to bringing them down. Kyle looked up at the stranger, his eyes blazing with a newfound purpose. "I'll do it," he said, his voice hard and cold as steel. "I'll stop the Scourge, whatever it takes." The stranger nodded, a satisfied smile playing across his lips. "Good," he said, "then let us begin." And with that, Kyle Henderson, the hero of the Unas Kalukamsku War, the savior of the galaxy, embarked on a new mission, a covert operation that would take him to the very heart of the enemy, to the dark places where the Scourge lurked, waiting to strike. He gathered his team, Kaz and Zix, and a handful of others, the best of the best, the ones who had survived the crucible of war and come out the other side. They were a motley crew, a mix of Unas and human and Kalukamsku, but they were united by a common purpose, a shared desire to protect the fragile peace that they had fought so hard to achieve. They struck out into the void, their ship a sleek, silent thing, a ghost in the darkness. They followed the leads that Zix provided, the intel that he had gathered during his time as a spy, and they began to piece together the Scourge's plan, the terrible truth of what they intended to do. It was a plan that would shatter the alliance between the Unas and the UTC, that would sow chaos and discord across the galaxy. The Scourge intended to frame the humans for a series of attacks on Una's targets, to make it seem as though the UTC had betrayed their allies, that they were the true enemy all along. Kyle and his team raced against time, desperate to stop the Scourge before they could put their plan into motion. They infiltrated their bases, sabotaged their weapons, and fought their way through hordes of enemy soldiers, each one a twisted, mutated thing, a product of the Scourge's dark experiments. But even as they fought, even as they pushed themselves to the brink of exhaustion, Kyle could feel a sense of unease growing within him, a gnawing doubt that he could not shake. Something was wrong, something that he could not quite put his finger on. It was as though there was a shadow lurking at the edges of his vision, a presence that he could not quite see, but that he could feel, watching him, waiting for the right moment to strike. And then, in a moment of terrible clarity, he realized the truth. The betrayal, when it came, was like a knife to the heart. Kaz, his old friend, his brother-in-arms, stood before him, his eyes cold and hard, his weapon leveled at Kyle's chest. "Why?" Kyle asked, his voice a hoarse whisper, his heart breaking in his chest. "Because of what you did," Kaz snarled, his voice thick with hatred and rage. "Because of my brother, the one you let die on that God's-forsaken planet, the one whose blood is on your hands." Kyle shook his head, his mind reeling, his world spinning out of control. Kaz, I never meant for anyone to die, you know that. But Kaz was beyond reason, beyond mercy. He had been consumed by his grief, his anger, his desire for revenge. And now he had found his chance, his opportunity to strike back at the one he blamed for all his pain. You should have died that day, Kaz said, his finger tightening on the trigger. You should have been the one to fall, not him. And then, in a moment of blinding agony, Kyle felt the bullet tear through his flesh, felt the searing heat of the plasma as it burned its way through his body. He fell, his hoverchair shattering beneath him, his body broken and bleeding on the cold metal floor. But even as he lay there, even as he felt the life draining from his body, Kyle refused to give up, refused to let the scourge win. With the last of his strength, he reached out, his fingers fumbling for the detonator that he had hidden in his armor, the failsafe that he had put in place for just such a moment as this. He pressed the button, and in that instant the world erupted into fire and flame. The Scourge's base, their weapons, their soldiers, all of it was consumed in a maelstrom of destruction, a cataclysm that shook the very foundations of the planet. And there, amidst the rubble and the ruin, Kyle Henderson breathed his last, his life given in service to a cause greater than himself, his sacrifice a testament to the indomitable will of the human spirit. In the days and weeks that followed, the galaxy mourned the loss of its greatest hero, the man who had given everything to protect the peace that he had fought so hard to achieve. The Unas and the UTC came together once more, their alliance stronger than ever, their resolve unshakable in the face of the threats that still lurked in the shadows. And on a distant planet, far from the chaos and the strife of the galaxy, a lone figure stood before a simple grave, his head bowed in silent tribute. It was Zix, the former spy, the one who had fought alongside Kyle in those final desperate hours, the one who had seen the truth of his sacrifice, the depth of his courage. "Farewell, my friend," Zix whispered, his voice thick with emotion, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "May your spirit find peace among the stars." And with that, he turned and walked away, his steps heavy with the weight of the galaxy's grief, his heart full of the memory of the man who had given everything to save them all. For Kyle Henderson was more than just a soldier, more than just a hero. He was a symbol, a beacon of hope in a galaxy that had known too much darkness, too much pain. And though he was gone, though his body lay cold and still beneath the earth, his spirit would live on, a shining light that would guide the way for generations to come. The scars of war might run deep, the wounds of the past might never fully heal, but as long as there were those who remembered, those who carried the torch that Kyle had lit, the galaxy would never truly be lost, never truly be without hope. For the memory of Kyle Henderson, the savior of the Unas, the champion of the UTC, would endure, a testament to the unbreakable spirit of humanity, a reminder of the sacrifices that had been made and the price that had been paid for the sake of peace. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.